You think surviving today is hard? Try 20,000 years ago when the ice sheets stretched from Norway to New York. Every sunrise meant 10 life-or-death problems that had to be solved before sunset. No grocery stores, no hospitals, no backup plan. One mistake, and you're frozen meat for the cave lions. These aren't the romantic caveman stories you see in movies. This is the brutal math of staying alive when the world was trying to kill you. 10 problems, 10 solutions, 10 reasons our ancestors earned their place in your DNA. If you value documented prehistoric history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. The script is researched and factual, using sources from archaeological sites across Europe and analysis from the Journal of Archaeological Science. Now back to the story. Number 1. Keeping fire alive for 16 hours straight. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, archaeologists found hearths from 27,000 years ago that burned continuously for months. The ash layers prove it. But here's the problem. Wood burns out in 4 to 6 hours max. Tundra had almost no trees. So how did they do it? Mammoth bone. One femur burns for 12 hours straight. They stack them like logs in patterns we can still see in the fire pits. The site shows over 2,000 mammoth bones arranged in burning formations. Each bone weighed up to 40 pounds. Teams of 4 hauled them from kill sites up to 3 miles away. Miss your shift feeding the fire, and everyone dies of cold by morning. The Pavlov site nearby shows families took turns in 4-hour watches. Sleep through your watch, wake up dead. But bone fires needed specific techniques. At Mazin in Ukraine, they discovered fire pits lined with flat mammoth scapula bones that reflected heat back into living spaces. The thermodynamics work perfectly. Bone burns at 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit, twice as hot as wood. They created controlled airflow systems using mammoth ribs as wind guards. The El Sidrón cave in Spain shows Neanderthals used similar techniques 50,000 years earlier. Bone marrow served as kindling. It burns fast and hot enough to ignite dense mammoth bones. One marrow-filled leg bone contained enough fat to start fires for a week. They extracted marrow with specific bone-cracking techniques, leaving percussion marks archaeologists can identify today. It's the marrow extraction, and you can't start tomorrow's fire. No fire meant death by dawn. Number 2. Finding water that won't kill you when everything's frozen solid. At Kostenki in Russia, 37,000 years ago, people carved through permafrost to reach groundwater 15 feet down. The tools are still there, mammoth tusk picks and reindeer antler scoops. But surface ice was death. Parasites stayed alive in frozen ponds for months. The coprolite evidence from German cave sites shows massive intestinal worm loads in people who drank bad water. So they melted snow over fire in sewn leather bags. One mistake, melting dirty snow with animal waste in it, and dysentery killed you in 3 days. The Grotte de Rennes site in France shows they tested water by dropping heated stones into it. If the stones cracked wrong, the water had too much mineral. If it tasted metallic, it had runoff from copper deposits that caused liver failure. They knew because they'd watched people die from it. The water procurement system required constant maintenance. At Kraków Spajista in Poland, archaeologists found evidence of underground water caches lined with mammoth hide and sealed with fat. These natural refrigerators kept clean water liquid at temperatures that froze surface sources solid. They dug collection systems that captured meltwater from specific geological formations. Limestone filtered out toxins, but granite runoff contained deadly heavy metals. The Abric Romani site in Spain shows they identified safe water sources by tracking animal behavior. Reindeer avoided certain streams that killed humans who drank from them. They mapped water safety across hundreds of square miles, passing knowledge through generations. One forgotten toxic stream location meant death for entire hunting parties. The isotope analysis from their teeth shows they traveled up to 50 miles to reach known clean water sources during droughts. Number 3. Staying warm enough to sleep without freezing to death in your dreams. Modern sleeping bags keep you alive down to negative 20 Fahrenheit. Ice Age people had mammoth hide and body heat. At Mezhyhirya in Ukraine, archaeologists found sleeping pits dug 3 feet into permafrost and lined with mammoth fur. The bone needles nearby show they sewed sleeping sacks from entire mammoth hides. One hide weighed over 200 pounds when raw. They stuffed them with Arctic fox fur and ptarmigan feathers. But here's the deadly part. You needed 4,000 calories just to keep your core temperature up during sleep. Missed dinner and your metabolism couldn't power heat production through the night. The sun gear burials in Russia show people wore up to 25 pounds of fur clothing to bed. Take it off and you'd be dead by dawn. Sharing body heat wasn't romantic. It was mandatory. 2-person sleeping systems where one person stays awake in shifts to keep the other's blood moving. The thermal engineering went deeper than simple fur layers. At Pushkar in Ukraine, they created sophisticated insulation systems using layered animal skins with air gaps between them. Experiments show this design maintained internal temperatures 40 degrees higher than outside air. They used specific fur types and precise arrangements. Dense wolf underfur against skin, longer mammoth guard hairs as middle layer, waterproof bear hide as outer shell. The Solutrean sites in France show they developed heated sleeping stones, rocks, kept in fires all day, then wrapped in hide and placed in sleeping areas. These stones stayed warm for 8 hours, exactly matching sleep cycles. They calculated heat retention down to the hour. At Gunnersdorf in Germany, sleeping areas show circular arrangements where body heat from 6 people created microclimates that could survive outside temperatures of negative 50 degrees. Lose one person and the thermal balance collapsed. Everyone froze. Number 4. Getting enough food to power a body that burns 5,000 calories a day in sub-zero conditions. Your modern body burns 2,000 calories sitting at a desk. Ice Age. People needed more than double that just to stay alive in the cold. At Schöningen in Germany, wooden spears from 400,000 years ago show they hunted horses in coordinated drives, but hunting was feast or famine. Kill a mammoth and you get 40,000 pounds of meat. Miss the mammoth and you starve. The Przemosty site in Czech Republic shows they dried meat in specific wind patterns to preserve it. One mammoth fed 20 people for 3 months. But preserving that much meat needed perfect technique. Too much moisture and it rotted. Too little and it turned to leather. The isotope analysis from their bones shows constant malnutrition. Even when they succeeded, they were always one failed hunt from starvation. The caloric mathematics were brutal and precise. At Ambrosievka in Ukraine, mammoth kill sites show they could process a 14-ton mammoth in 18 hours using coordinated butchering teams. They removed specific organs in calculated order. Liver first for immediate vitamin A, kidneys. For salt, heart for dense protein. The fat content analysis shows mammoth meat provided 9,400 calories per pound. But they needed techniques to access calories from bones and marrow. Bone cracking at Taubach in Germany shows they could extract 3,200 calories from a single mammoth femur. The percussion marks reveal specific striking techniques that cracked bones without destroying marrow. Miss the technique and lose half the calories. They developed seasonal hunting calendars based on animal fat content. Mammoth hunting in late fall when animals had maximum fat reserves. Spring hunts yielded animals with 60% less fat content. Timing meant survival. The Dolny Vestinich site shows storage pits that could preserve 40,000 pounds of meat through winter using salt, smoke, and controlled freezing. Number 5. Making tools that won't break when your life depends on them. At Atapuerca in Spain, archaeologists found Apulian hand axes from 800,000 years ago, made with 300 strikes per tool. Each strike had to hit the exact angle or the flint shattered. No hardware store to buy replacements. One broken spear point during a mammoth hunt meant death for the entire hunting party. The Boxgrove site in England shows they carried tool-making kits with backup flint cores and antler pressure flakers. Master toolmakers could produce a spear point in 20 minutes. Apprentices took 3 hours and most attempts failed. The debris piles show they made 50 practice points to get 10 good ones. Cutting tools had to stay sharp for butchering massive carcasses in hours before the meat spoiled. Dull tools meant wasted meat and starvation. Tool production required geological expertise that took decades to master. At Grimes Graves in England, they mined flint from specific chalk layers 40 feet underground. Surface flint shattered in cold weather, but deep flint stayed stable at negative temperatures. They identified flint quality by sound. Good flint rang like a bell when struck. Poor flint made dull thuds. The Spienas mines in Belgium show they extracted flint using antler picks and mammoth shoulder blade shovels, following specific seams hundreds of yards underground. 1 cubic foot of quality flint could produce 20 spear points that each lasted 6 months of heavy use. They hafted stone points using pine resin heated to exactly 200 degrees. Too hot and it became brittle, too cool and it wouldn't bond. The Kostianki sites show they maintained tool inventories with backup options for every essential task. Lose your primary hunting spear and grab backup number 2 immediately. The edge wear analysis from tools shows they resharpened cutting implements every 3 days. Dull blade meant failed hunt, meant starvation, meant death. If you're still watching, drop that subscribe button. This research takes months to compile from archaeological reports. Comment your location and let's see how global this audience really is. Back to the deadly daily problems. Number 6. Avoiding predators that saw humans as walking snacks. Cave lions weighed 600 pounds and hunted in packs, short-faced. Bears stood 12 feet tall and ran 30 miles per hour. At Drachenloch Cave in Switzerland, cave bear bones show gnaw marks from human tools, but also human bones with cave bear tooth marks. The predators fought back. The Grotto Chauvet paintings from 36,000 years ago show cave lions stalking human figures. These weren't symbolic. They were survival manuals showing pack hunting behavior and attack patterns. Hyena coprolites from the same period contain human bone fragments. People slept in shifts with fire barriers and mammoth bone palisades. The R.C. Circure site shows they posted sentries with bone horns to signal danger. One person sleeping through guard duty got everyone eaten. The bone damage patterns prove it happened regularly. The predator defense systems evolved through deadly trial and error. At Combe-Grenal in France, Neanderthal sites show they created kill zones using natural terrain features, narrow passages, where humans could use spears while predators couldn't maneuver. Cave lion hunting behavior analysis shows they avoided areas with constant fire and noise. Humans developed acoustic defense systems using bone clappers and mammoth ivory drums that created sound barriers. The Bruniquel cave formations show they built underground refuges accessible only through passages too small for large predators. These refuges contained emergency food supplies and water stores for siege conditions lasting weeks. At Kafsa Cave, in Israel, human remains showed defensive wound patterns from cave bear attacks. The bone trauma analysis reveals specific fighting techniques. Spear thrusts aimed at shoulders to disable charging predators. Miss the vital points and die under 600 pounds of muscle and claws. They tracked predator territories using scent markers and territorial scratches, creating mental maps of safe corridors through dangerous landscape. Number 7. Treating injuries that would be minor today but meant death sentences then. A simple cut on your hand today needs a bandage. 20,000 years ago, infection killed you in a week. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints, a Neanderthal skeleton shows a healed leg fracture that would have needed months of care. Someone fed him and kept him alive while he couldn't hunt, but the isotope analysis shows massive infection in the bone. He lived but probably died from sepsis complications years later. They used willow bark for pain. It contains natural aspirin. Birch fungus for antiseptic. But surgical knowledge came from watching people die and remembering what didn't work. The Shanidar cave burials show amputated limbs healed with primitive tourniquets made from sinew. Stop the bleeding or die in minutes. No second chances. Medical knowledge accumulated through catastrophic failures and rare successes. At Dolny-Vestinice, they found evidence of primitive surgery tools made from mammoth ivory, thin blades sharp enough for precise cutting, curved scrapers for removing infected tissue. The bone chemistry analysis shows they used heated metal oxides as antiseptics. Iron oxide killed bacteria but also damaged healthy tissue if applied incorrectly. They developed wound treatment protocols using honey and tree resins that modern medicine confirms as effective antibiotics. At Sungir, burial evidence shows successful treatment of skull fractures using leather pressure bandages and willow bark poultices. The survival rates were brutal. 70% of serious injuries resulted in death within a week, but the 30% who survived developed immunity systems that made them nearly indestructible. Dental analysis from multiple sites shows they performed tooth extractions using flint tools and sinew with poplar bark as anesthetic. One infected tooth could cause sepsis that killed in days. The Grotte du Rennes sites show they practiced deliberate bone setting using mammoth rib splints. Wrong alignment meant permanent crippling. Number 8. Finding building materials that won't collapse and kill you in your sleep. Trees were rare in Ice Age tundra. At Megahiria, people built houses from mammoth bones, skulls for foundations, ribs for walls, tusks for roof supports. One house used bones from 29 mammoths. Each skull weighed 300 pounds. Moving them without wheels or horses meant teams of 8 people dragging them on mammoth hide sleds. For miles, the structural engineering had to be perfect. Wrong angle and the roof caves in during the night. The site shows multiple collapsed structures with human bones underneath. Trial and error with your life on the line. They developed specific bone-fitting techniques that matched curved ribs to form interlocking walls. Get the pattern wrong, the wind rips your shelter apart in the first blizzard. Construction required understanding physics without formal education. At Pushkari, they created foundation systems that distributed weight across permafrost without melting the ground beneath. Mammoth skulls provided stable bases that could support 12,000 pounds of roof weight. They calculated load-bearing limits by observing natural bone strength under pressure. The engineering analysis shows they used specific geometric patterns, hexagonal arrangements that provided maximum stability with minimum materials. Tusk placement followed precise angles that channeled wind around structures instead of creating destructive pressure points. At Kostienki, they developed modular construction techniques using standardized bone components that could be assembled quickly during storms. Emergency shelter could be erected in 4 hours using pre-fitted mammoth bones. The architectural remnants show they created internal support systems using vertebrae columns that prevented roof collapse under snow loads exceeding 2 tons. Wrong vertebrae selection meant structural failure, death by architecture. Number 9. Preserving food without refrigeration when bacteria still worked in the cold. modern freezers keep food safe at 0 degrees. Ice Age winters hit negative, 40 regularly. But permafrost thaw during brief summers spoiled meat in hours. At Dolny Vestanis, they dug storage pits below the permafrost line and lined them with mammoth hide. The meat had to be processed within 12 hours of the kill, or parasites took over. They cut flesh in strips exactly 1 inch thicker. And the inside stayed warm enough for bacteria. Thinner, and it lost too much nutrition drying. The chemical analysis of preserved meat shows they used specific smoking techniques with juniper and pine needles. Wrong wood, and the preservatives didn't penetrate. The coprolite evidence shows even successfully preserved meat gave them constant stomach parasites. Eating was always a calculated risk. Food preservation techniques required chemical knowledge, gained through deadly experimentation. At Mazine, they discovered they could extend meat preservation by combining smoking with natural salt deposits. Salt mines at Hallstatt show extraction techniques that produced pure sodium chloride for meat. Curing. They identified plants with natural preservative properties. Wild garlic contained allicin that prevented bacterial growth. Cranberries had benzoic acid that stopped mold. The molecular analysis of preserved tissues shows they achieved preservation, levels matching modern standards using only natural compounds. But the process demanded precise timing and temperature control. Smoking required maintaining temperatures between 80 and 90 degrees for exactly 48 hours. Too hot, and the meat cooked instead of preserved. Too cool, and bacteria thrived. They developed fermentation techniques using controlled bacterial cultures that created acidic environments hostile to dangerous pathogens. The Abercrombie site shows ceramic vessels designed for controlled fermentation that could preserve plant foods for 6 months, fail the fermentation process, and deadly botulism killed in hours. Number 10. Navigation in whiteout conditions. When getting lost meant freezing to death in hours. No GPS, no compass, no roads. Just endless white in every direction and wind that erased all tracks in minutes. At Kostenki, archaeologists found mammoth ivory markers placed exactly 1 mile, apart along hunting routes. The carvings show directional symbols and distance counts. They created the first GPS system from mammoth tusks. But reading the signs needed perfect memory. 1 wrong turn in a blizzard, and you wandered until the cold killed you. The sun gear. Burials show people wore ivory compasses with star-pattern carvings that aligned with constellations. Cloud cover for 3 days meant no navigation reference. The bone chemistry from frozen bodies found in later periods shows they died of hypothermia within 6 hours of getting lost. Direction meant life. Confusion meant death. The navigation systems reached extraordinary sophistication through necessity. At Avdevo, they carved detailed topographical maps on mammoth tusks, showing river bends, hill formations, and seasonal landmarks across territories, spanning 300 square miles. These maps included distance measurements accurate to within 10% of modern GPS readings. They developed celestial navigation using specific star patterns visible in high latitudes. Polaris, Cassiopeia, and the Big Dipper formed triangulation points for direction finding. The ivory artifacts show mathematical calculations for determining position using shadow lengths and sun angles. At Gagarino, they created emergency navigation caches buried at strategic points containing backup direction tools and landmark maps. Getting lost meant following specific protocols. Stay put for 6 hours, build signal fires using green wood that creates visible smoke. Mark your location using stone cairns that could be spotted from miles away. The survival statistics from frozen remains show that people who followed emergency protocols had 40% survival rates. Those who panicked and wandered had 0% survival rates. Navigation wasn't just finding direction, it was staying alive long enough to be found. But here's what changes everything we just heard. In 2019, geneticists analyzed DNA from Dolny Vestanic and found something that reframes this entire survival story. The people solving these 10 deadly problems every single day weren't just surviving. They were thriving enough to develop complex art, music, and social structures that required massive caloric surplus. The Venus figurines and musical instruments found at the sites show they had enough success with these daily survival challenges to spend time on culture. They weren't desperate, cave dwellers barely clinging to life. They were the most successful apex predators Earth had ever produced. The isotope analysis reveals they maintained stable populations across millennia, passing down survival knowledge that kept mortality rates below modern developing nations. 20,000 years later, we struggle to keep our phones charged for 8 hours. They kept themselves alive for 800 centuries. Cold, smart, unbreakable.